Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, the week that was, it was nearly perfect for the Red Hot Mets, and of course, the week that will be as they look to keep pace and maybe even better in the wild card race. We go down on the farm to break down a rising pitching prospect, review and update our scoreboard predictions, and of course, we answer your mailbag questions here on the Mets Pod. So subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel and leave a mailbag question there or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today and subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to drop us a review, drop us a mailbag question with that review. Watch us on YouTube and also ask mailbag questions in the comments under the show there as well. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMeo. And Joe, I'm not even going to say hello to you yet before I debut our new segment. New segment alert is the Mets Pod Mea Culpa. We're sorry, Tylor Megill. We were wrong. We shouldn't have wished you to AAA. We shouldn't have even wished you to the bullpen or the White Sox or wherever it may be. You've done well. This is our apology form, and we thank you. Joe, why has he been successful in these last two starts?
He is getting ahead in counts, and that's the thing that Megill has always ran into trouble. We talked about this on last year's show, on this year's show, how many times Megill would be at 85 pitches through 3 2/3. He only gave up one run, but he just feels like he's battling through everything. And the first inning against Toronto on Monday, it was a lot of that. It was 30 pitches. He loaded the bases, but he got out of the jam, and then cruise control, retired the last 16 batters he faced. What it comes down to is Megill has good stuff. He is a capable big league pitcher, but when you get behind in counts, it's really tough in this league when you don't have that real put away stuff where you could just make up for any kind of errors with a bunch of strikeouts. Megill needs to get in front of batters, and he was able to do it the last couple starts, and that sets the Mets up for some, potential success here with Paul Blackburn dealing with the lower back tightness, and we're unsure when exactly he's going to be back. So that means Tylor Megill, you're going to be in the rotation still. So big start for him and a big win for the Mets.
And if you're Megill, keep earning the next start, right, Joe? That's all it comes down to, is keep earning that next start where the Mets can lean on you more and more and more. And since we last recorded, they obviously swept the Red Sox. They take 2 out of 3 from the Reds. It really felt like, and I know it's crazy to say after a 9-game winning streak is snapped, the Mets let that last game against the Reds get away from them. That game was in their hands. Just goes to show you how well they've been playing. And a lot of it is on the backs of the pitching right now. And they beat the Blue Jays in the first game of that series in Toronto in a bit of a sweat. Of course, that last ball hit off of Edwin Diaz was hit hard, but not hard enough. And a win is a win at the end of the day for the Mets right now, where, listen, as it stands here, Joe, it's impossible for the other 3 teams in this wild card hunt. The Braves, who are really beat up and hanging around, they've been, you give them credit, they've been kind of a pest considering where their injuries lie. The Padres and the Diamondbacks have come back down to earth after it felt like they would never lose. It's the Mets' turn right now, where it feels like, if you're an opposing fan or even if you're a Mets fan, it feels like this team is not losing. And the sign of a good team, and this is how things have been for a couple months for the Mets, which is a total 180 from the beginning of the season, is that certain areas of the team can pick up others. And right now it feels like this Mets team is leaning on their pitching. And when they're in close games where, hey, we got a 1-run lead, we got a 2-run lead, or whatever it may be, and we're going to need insurance runs or else our bullpen's going to blow it, they've actually been able to rely on the bullpen, who is rounding into form at the perfect time.
They are rounding into form at the perfect time. And, Connor, when you go through a baseball season, it's ups and downs for everybody. And during the prime Grimace era, the Mets were like number 1 in baseball in every offensive category that exists for over a month straight. They picked up the starting pitching at that time. Then the offense fell off a little bit, where, Lindor obviously has been on a huge stretch, but the pitching picked up, and now they have the 3rd best starting pitching ERA in the sport since the middle of June. So it's definitely a balancing act. And to your point about the bullpen, Jose Buto, it looks like he's tiring to me. His stuff doesn't seem crisp. He's missing the strike zone too much. I think it's time to shift him a little back in the pecking order. I think Ryan Stanek and Phil Maton right now are, despite what Phil Maton did in that game against Cincinnati, he's been fantastic for this team. I think right now those are your two primary setup men, and you just kind of continue to roll the wave of a bullpen. And that's something David Stern's talked about since the beginning of the season. The bullpen is in flux from day one through game 162. And the Mets are a prime example of that. And the bullpen is, to your point, stepping up where they really need them to. Right now, September, it wasn't a pretty win against Toronto. They didn't hit. They scored both the runs on wild pitches. Right now, I don't care about the big picture stuff. It's win the game. That's what you have to do at this point in time. The offense isn't looking quite right. That's a June conversation. That's not a September 10th conversation, because it's now you have to win every game, because this wild card race, I posted it on Twitter last night. Mets are a game and a half back of San Diego. They're a game back of Arizona, and they're a game ahead of Atlanta. It is truly a wild card race.
It is. And listen, the Mets don't need to win 9 out of every 10 games to make the playoffs. The Mets right now need to just play winning baseball, taking series, chipping away. Something Joe and I have talked about for a long time on this show is that they are going to lose games. The season is too long. But if you are taking series, something the 2022 team was really good at before things kind of fell apart at the end of the year, then it feels like they're going to outlast one of these three teams, maybe more at this rate. But it feels like if the Mets continue to play winning baseball, which they've done the small sample size thing is out the window. Like, this is who the Mets are right now. They've been this way for a long time. The Mets are tied with
they're tied with Arizona for the best record in the sport since June 1st. So that is 3 months of baseball that the Mets, obviously it's aided by a long winning streak and all that. But I mean, you could take over again, but just wanted to throw in there. Yeah. Best record in the sport since June 1st.
Right. I mean, that's the perfect stat there, Joe, I was looking for. It's that this is not a small sample size. What's interesting to me is, because I do sometimes like to look at things are going well, but what are the Mets winning in spite of right now? Because when you look at the lineup overall, okay, it has not been a good year for Francisco Alvarez. We know that. But the Mets don't necessarily need Francisco Alvarez at age 22 to be a superstar right now to be good. It's been a great year from Francisco Lindor. Pete Alonso's OPS is hovering right below 800. We'd like to see Pete be better in bigger spots, but it's not at the point where Pete's been dreadful or anything like that. Right. Vientos has been the surprise of the lineup. He's absolutely just tremendous and incredible. JD Martinez has been, almost what you kind of signed up for. Another guy hovering right below an 800 OPS. Joe, right now, my what if is, what if Brandon Nimmo can get going again? I mean, you look at Brandon Nimmo, okay, a 708 OPS in April and March, a 751 OPS in May, which is probably closer to what he should be, right? Over 1,000 in June. Joe, in September right now, his OPS is 426, coming off a month of August where it was 684. That is not Brandon Nimmo. We know he's a better player than that.
It's been a struggle for Nimmo, and he kind of carried them during that grimace era. Like I think June is the epitome of that grimace era, and Brandon Nimmo was at the forefront of that. And these guys have to pick each other up. And Mark Vientos, you bring him up, obviously not just a surprise being as good as he is. This is legitimately, he has a chance to win the Silver Slugger for third base in the National League this year, and that's not making something up to make him sound good. He's been unbelievable. If Brandon Nimmo can get back, he doesn't have to be June. He doesn't have to have 1,000 OPS the rest of the way, but he can't have a 400 OPS either. And what if Pete Alonso, obviously we talk about the lack of success with runners in scoring position. What if Pete Alonso gets closer to his career norms with runners in scoring position? I understand it hasn't been good all year. I need it to be good now. I'm not concerned about June anymore. It's gone. So I think Nimmo and Alonso are the two guys that I'm looking at. If they could step up over these next couple weeks, I think that'll be massive in the Mets' pursuit to, like you said, outlast one or two of these other teams in the race.
And as you could hear, my dog loudly reacting and agreeing with our Brandon Nimmo, if he gets going, what could happen takes right there, Joe. So she is very much in on, let's get Nimmo going, let's get Pete back to being the best version of himself, and then we'll see what happens here. And Joe, I can't believe we're this deep into the podcast and we haven't even had to address Jeff McNeil down for the season, which the weirdest takeaway I have is that you kind of feel for McNeil the most in this one because the team hasn't really missed a beat yet. And yet it hurts their depth. There's no denying that. It's absolutely something that, when the Mets need a deeper bench or they like to shift McNeil, their versatility, they can play him in the outfield. And McNeil's had a strong second half. He really, really has. But once upon a time in years past, this feels like an injury that you'd be like, oh my God, how could this happen now at this time? This is a team that has passed the adversity test because of, look at Luis Torrens stepping up at one point this year. Jose Iglesias has been one of the best finds in the entire sport. We opened the show with Tyler McGill stepping into the rotation. So this is one that it's just really, really disappointing for McNeil.
It is disappointing for him. And what it comes down to, Connor, one of the reasons you just mentioned it, the play of Jose Iglesias. If the Mets didn't have Jose Iglesias, then this McNeil injury would be considered, much more of a bigger deal. But it's a loss for the team too, not just a loss for McNeil. I mean, you mentioned the second half. McNeil was getting pretty close to being Jeff McNeil again. He was hitting 290, 376 on base, 923 OPS. So he really was kind of rebounding to the point where you think to 2025, which I hate to do it, but my mind just always looks ahead. It was just like, oh, maybe Jeff McNeil can be a part of the 2025 team, or maybe Jeff McNeil has got his trade value back, whatever side of the coin you want to be on. But obviously a loss for the Mets to lose the versatility that McNeil provides and just the reliability, because the kind of effect of this is Jose Iglesias is your everyday second baseman. That means times late in games, Carlos Mendoza has pulled Mark Vientos for defense. Can't really do that anymore. So Vientos has to step up defensively at third, where he's been fine. Certainly not a Gold Glover, and he's not butchering plays, but it was an advantage when you could late in games take him out of the game and put Iglesias there. That is not there any longer. So a loss for the Mets, and tough for McNeil, who was coming into his own while the Mets were getting hot and heading in a playoff push. But hey, that's the way it goes. Every team has injuries. We've rallied off the Braves injuries. We've talked about the injuries the Diamondbacks have gone through. It's a part of the game. And McNeil, if the Mets make a deep playoff run somehow, maybe he'll make his way back.
Without a doubt. The last thing on the week that was, Joe, it feels like Edwin Diaz is finding his stuff again. The velocity is noticeably more consistently closer to the best version of Diaz. And, obviously control has its days, as it does with all closers, but I don't know. Do you think it's the adrenaline right now, Joe? I mean, since he gave up the grand slam to Corbin Carroll, it feels like Diaz has come back just with confidence, throwing harder, and it feels like the juices are just flowing a little differently for him.
It's very weird because it's that bad thing that somehow led to good results. That's not often what you talk about when you talk about closers. It's like, they blew the big game. Now it's going to come the stretch where they can't get anybody out.
Look at Clay Holmes.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. We don't need to get into Clay Holmes, but it's been a struggle for him. Diaz, on the other hand, some of it could be he's getting further and further away from that injury and getting more comfortable in his mechanics. And something that was a real issue while the Mets were winning a bunch of games, Edwin Diaz wasn't pitching in them because the Mets were winning games by 5 runs, by 6 runs. They were handily winning baseball games. Diaz is now pitching much more consistently of late, and he has been very open. He wants to pitch all the time. He feels he's worse when there is gaps between him pitching, and he's now proven the ability to pitch back-to-back days, back-to-back-to-back days. So I think we're at the point now where Edwin Diaz is, one, fully healthy, and more important than just actually being fully healthy, confidence wise, he knows he's healthy, because I'm sure it's been in the back of his mind all year, and he feels like that weight has maybe came off his shoulder a little bit, and he is confident. And man, you're seeing the hundreds, the 101s, and this is the Edwin Diaz that this podcast fell in love with a couple years ago.
That's a great point about the confidence, because it's easy for somebody not going through it to sit there and go, why is this guy that was performing at a godlike level not doing that, coming off an injury? And what you forget is the months and months of rehab. Even after you go through that rehab process, you don't always have confidence in the area you're injured in. And sometimes that can tweak something mechanically. It can have you just in your own head about when you're landing on that leg or anything like that. It's just a totally different mindset. And the only way you ever get through that is with reps in live action. And Diaz is at the point of the season right now. It's also a weird season, right, Joe, where he's been on the IL sometimes. He had the suspension. He hasn't had a full season. So now that it feels like he's got some momentum going and some consistency going, what has arrived with that? The version of Diaz from a stuff perspective that we've grown to love. I don't think there's a coincidence with that. So it's a great call out by you, just regaining that confidence coming off an injury. All right, quickly, let's do the week that will be, because this is a big one for the Mets. 2 more against the Blue Jays. They got their first of 2 series to close out the year against the Phillies. This one is 3 in Philadelphia. And then they have the series against the Nationals that is a different Nationals team. I mean, James Wood has had a really, really good run of it since he's been called up. Dylan Cruz is up. They are young and trying to see what their young talent has. Obviously, Jesse Winker is here with the Mets right now. But at the end of the day, Joe, especially when you have 2 tough games left with the Blue Jays, we know how good the Phillies are. You'd like to capitalize on that National series for sure.
That Nationals team is I just have this gut feeling that's going to be such an annoying series.
Marlins-esque.
Yeah. Like you say, all the young players that they have, those guys have nothing to lose. They're playing free. They're just playing ball. And the Mets and all teams down the stretch, whether they want to admit it or not, you tense up a little bit, right? When you get closer to that pennant race, you're tensing up just a touch, and you're facing a team with absolutely nothing to lose. The Mets could sweep the Nationals, and it means basically nothing to them. Whereas if it goes the other way, it obviously could be significant to the Mets' hopes. But we have talked on this show, Connor, about that Braves series, and I still think that Braves series looms largest through the rest of the season. The 7 games that they have against the Phillies, I know 3 of them are this week, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a week, but the 7 games that they have with Philly the rest of the way, I know Philly is a fantastic team, and they're going to win the NL East unless something crazy happens here. You can't let Philly absolutely beat you down. And to the Mets' credit, they have played up to their competition this year. So I have faith they'll be able to hold serve a little bit with the Phillies, and maybe it's 4-3. They just can't let that get out of control. And then, of course, you mentioned the 2 games remaining with Toronto. Just take it a game at a time, win tonight's baseball game, win the series in Toronto, and then get to tomorrow.
Let's take a brief break from the really exciting pro team right now and go down on the farm. And Joe, we have talked about Jonah Tong this year, who's been a rapid riser through this system. But how about the debut in Binghamton, Joe, for the young pitcher, 21 years old, just turned 21 in June, his 7th round pick. If you missed the first time we talked about Jonah Tong this year, once again, a former 7th rounder who has had some big time strikeout stuff in the Met system, Joe, and his debut in Binghamton AA goes 6 innings, doesn't give up a run, and he had 9 strikeouts.
No runs, no hits, no walks. The only batter to reach base was on a throwing error, I believe by Jeremiah Jackson. Jonah Tong, if you want, Google Joe DeMayo, Jonah Tong. I interviewed him a couple months back and wrote a piece about it for SNY. I think it's something you would love to read, because this is a smart kid that really gets where the Mets pitching development is going. And Connor, for you, when you rank your NFL draft prospects, you rank a million guys every April before the draft. There's always guys that you look at and you're like, I wish I put so-and-so higher. When I look at my top 30 list that I put out for SNY last month, I look at where I have Jonah Tong. I go, I should have put him a couple spots higher. He is broken out in a massive way. The fastball is mostly low 90s. He'll get up to 95, 96 on occasion, but it has such unique characteristics. When I spoke to him, he said when you look in the pitch model of his fastball, it's actually like a lefty fastball instead of a righty fastball, with the way it just kind of rises and goes kind of the other way than what you'd expect. And it's very reminiscent of Shota Imanaga on the Cubs. Very similar in the sense that it's mainly low 90s, but it's got that induced vertical break that causes hitters to just swing under it and miss it. Tong has an old school 12-6 curve that generates a ton of swing and misses. Changeup, cutter / hard slider. His size and mechanics lead some to believe that there might be some reliever risk here. But from a 7th round pick by way of Canada, the Mets have certainly turned Jonah Tong into a meaningful pitching prospect that if I had to redo my rankings today, which I don't want to redo my rankings today, but if I had to, Jonah Tong would be higher than he was in my most recent update.
Well, you nailed it, Joe, where it's a guy, the reason he's not a little higher in your rankings at the time is, let's call it what it is. He feels like a little bit of an outlier, right? A 7th round pick. Not to take away anything from Canada, who has had plenty of pitching talent over the years, but a 7th round pick out of Canada that is 6'1", 180 and a righty. I mean, in this sport these days, there's not a lot of pitchers that are hovering around 6 feet tall, well under 200 pounds, that are right-handed, that are taken in the 7th round, and all of a sudden you blink and go, this guy's striking out everybody across the A ball and now double A. So Tong is... And
he struck out Spencer Jones, the Yankees' top prospect, who strikes out a million times, but struck him out 3 times in his double A debut, which is impressive regardless of how much Spencer Jones strikes out.
Yes, the great Spencer Jones that was untouchable for Tariq Skubal and
everybody.
Yeah, very fun. All right, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. All right, Joe, going to review our scoreboard predictions from last week before we make some new ones. Yes or no, will Starling Marte hit at least 1 home run? Joe, you said no. I said yes, and you get the point. Over-under push was at 2 for DJ Stewart hits. We both went under. DJ Stewart did not have a hit. We both got a point. It's what I would call a bingo free space. Over-under push was at 1 for Francisco Alvarez home runs. Joe, you went under. I went under. Unfortunately, Alvarez did not hit a home run. We both got a point. Over-under push was at 1 for Francisco Lindor home runs. We both went over. Lindor just hit 1, so no points awarded as he pushes. Over-under push, this was the most interesting one of the week. Lindor hit was at 7. We both went over. Lindor, through the first 3 games of our 6 games on the scoreboard, had 5 hits, but he didn't have a hit after that. So it ends up going under. We don't get a point here. Lindor started out hot. He fizzled a little bit. And listen, he's going to be locked in, though, for the MVP stretch. Over-under push was at 1 for Drew Gilbert home runs. This one is remarkable. In 6 Syracuse games. Joe, you pushed at 1. I went under. I said, he can't keep doing this. He hit 2 home runs. Nobody gets a point. Drew Gilbert is just on an absolute ridiculous home run pace since he's been back. Over-under push was at 4 for Mets wins. Joe, you went over. I pushed. The Mets won 5 games. They stay hot. Big week for you, Joe. You win 4-2 this week. You have the season lead 59-52 for this